Hello friends, my name is Bintou and welcome back to my channel. So we are getting closer and closer to the end of 2020 and the start of 2021. And actually New Year's is probably my favorite holiday of the entire year. There's something about like a fresh restart and taking time to reflect and then set new goals that I really enjoy. And so one of the things that I have been doing is looking back on all of the reading that I've done so far in the year 2020. And I decided to go ahead and put some numbers into Excel and create a chart to kind of display some of the stats that I care about. So you won't see like a ton of stats in here because I didn't do a very good job of tracking things along the way. And that's one of the things that I'm going to work on for 2021 is developing a better system for tracking my reading so that it's a lot easier to do this kind of thing on a quarterly and yearly basis. So with that said, let's get into a look at my 2020 reading stats. So the first stat, the biggest stat of them all, is the total number of books that I read so far this year. And that number currently sits at 112 books. So as of the day I'm filming this, it is December 7th, and surely that number is going to go up. I have added a book that I'm currently reading to that total, but I could see this getting up to at least 115, maybe 117. I'm not sure 120 will be attainable because I have had a rather slow reading month so far in December, and I don't want to push it just to hit a number. So we'll see what the final total ends up being. But for right now, that total is 112. According to my Goodreads stats as well, I have read a total of 39,206 pages. For me, this number is a little bit meaningless because I can't really visualize what 36,000 pages looks like. I guess the fattest book that I have right now is the Rhythm of War book at 1,300. So I guess it would be like 30 of those. I don't know, would that go from ground to ceiling? That's a visualization worth doing because that's kind of the only way I can imagine how big a number that actually is. The next stat we have is publication year. So this is another chart that I just got off of my Goodreads. And you'll see on this chart that most of the books that I read are on or near that 2020 line. And I would say that that's pretty accurate. Most of the books that I read were published within the past 3 to 5 years, with a decent number published in 2020. There are a few outliers. So like that one at the very bottom, I'm pretty sure that was Jane Eyre. That was the oldest book that I read. And then all the little smatterings in the middle from the 40s to the 60s and 80s. A lot of that I think was Stephen King. I read a couple classics from Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston, which was The Bluest Eye, Beloved, and Their Eyes Were Watching God. And then I think some of the Octavia E. Butler books that I read are on here as well, which there were two of them. I read Kindred and Parable of the Sower. Those books account for anything that is below 2,000 most likely. I'm okay with this. I didn't have a goal for publication really. I had a goal for classics and I did hit that goal because I wanted to read I think 2 classics, and I in fact read, if we count Toni Morrison's, which they did fall under the classics category on Goodreads, that's a total of about 4 classics that I think I ended up reading. I'll take that. For me, that's pretty good. I'm not a huge classics reader. One book that is on my list is Don Quixote, and maybe I'll read that for 2021. That'll be my classics goal. Next, we have books over time, and this chart is also from Goodreads, and it shows the number of books that I have read each month. And you can kind of see there are a couple spikes on here. So February, there's a huge spike there. That's because February is when I got my Kindle Oasis, and I was like on a mission. I was really motivated to read because I loved the device. And so that's why you see that huge spike in February. It goes back down a little bit in March, April, with May being probably my lowest reading month of the entire year. I don't remember why that was. That is the month that I started BookTube though. And so you can see from there, things go up a little bit, partly because if you see June, July, August, particularly July and August, highest months, that's because I'm a school teacher. So that was my summer vacation. I was still working part-time, and I wrapped up my master's this summer, so I was doing stuff, but I did have more time to actually read books, and so August has the largest number of books. And then slowly making the way down to about 9 books a month as the school year started all over again, and I've been doing a ton of work. And then of course, December is not complete yet because it's only the start of December. All right, now the most interesting part for me is the breakdown by genres. and a couple of other things that I wanted to see how I fared. The first thing I wanted to look at is my fiction versus nonfiction books that I read. And I read a total of 90 fiction and 22 nonfiction books. And the chart shows that that's right around 20% nonfiction and 80% fiction. And I believe that was exactly my goal for 2020. I don't think I formally wrote it down, but I know that I wanted to read 20% nonfiction, and I reached that goal. I'm very satisfied with this. I think 20% is a good number for me in terms of nonfiction. I was probably able to achieve it because I picked up so many interesting nonfiction books this year. Probably some of my favorites. Invisible Woman was really good. I enjoyed that tremendously. I'm currently reading Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land. No Filter, The Story of Instagram is another nonfiction book that I recently read that I thought was super fascinating. And The Story of More, which is a book on climate change, was so easy to read. It is definitely a nonfiction rec if you're looking to increase your number of nonfiction or if you're interested in the climate change topic. And now I'll break down the fiction and nonfiction, and we'll start with fiction. So in fiction, the two biggest categories, and this is not at all surprising to me, are mystery and thriller at 21% and then romance at 33%. The funny thing is, I think the romance category picked up when I started BookTube because I hadn't had much romance in the first half of the year, but I think I had discovered a romance booktuber and I realized that I hadn't read romance a lot, and I started picking it up, and then I remembered why it's so much fun to read, and it ended up dominating fiction for me. The trouble with romance is a lot of those books I feel like are very forgettable. I would say within that category, the standouts for me, I really loved the Bride Test, Happy Ever After playlist. Yeah, those are the ones off the top of my head that I can remember. I did do a video on the top 5 contemporary romances that I read this year. One of those does cross over into historical fiction though. And then mystery and thriller, another one of my favorite genres. I think the standout mystery and thriller book for me so far this year was Megan Golden's book, The Night Swim. I really enjoyed that one. The next categories were historical fiction at 12%. And this one surprised me. I didn't know that I had read this much historical fiction, but it turns out that I really did enjoy most of the historical fiction that I read. The knockouts in this category were definitely The Murmur of Bees, which remains probably the most beautifully written book that I have read this year. And I'll add The Mountains Sing to that because I really did enjoy that one as well. The Henna Artist is high on the list in this category, and also The Vanishing Half. Those were some of the standout historical fiction books that I read this year. And then we've got 10% of contemporary and horror. I think horror is much higher this year than it probably normally would be for me because I read a ton of Stephen King books this year. I had kind of discovered him, I think, at the end of last year, and so 2020 was me getting caught up on King's works. And that's probably why horror is this high of a percentage for me. And then you can see I've got fantasy at 7%. I think that was mostly, I read 2 Stormlight Archive books this year. I can't remember what else fell into this category. There are classics, so the classics that I talked about earlier that I read this year. And then sci-fi is 1%. I think this was the Octavia E. Butler book, Parable of the Sower, I think ended up being classified as sci-fi. Very clearly not a huge sci-fi reader, although I think that I should attempt to add more sci-fi to my list. Not out of any sense of well-roundedness, but I did like that book, and I guess I don't go out of my way to choose sci-fi books. So if looking forward to 2021, I think adding more sci-fi will be something that I want to do. So if you are actually a sci-fi reader and you have a recommendation for sci-fi for someone that doesn't read a lot of sci-fi, definitely leave it down below because I will be interested to see that. And then under nonfiction, not surprising at all, the vast majority of the nonfiction that I read this year was memoir at 32%. And there was a point in the summer, I think it was July, I had like a July wrap-up part 1, which was nearly all entirely in memoirs, but they were a lot of fun, so that was pretty neat. The next 3 are pretty evenly split at science and technology, history and politics, and race can kind of fall under this category as well. And this is a lot of the Carol Anderson books that I read this year. And then feminism at 18% as well. I read a couple books this year that could be classified as feminism. There was Hood Feminism, We Should All Be Feminists. That was Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's book. And then I think Invisible Woman also fell into this category. And then productivity at 14%. The only productivity book I remember reading is Make Time, and I don't know that I have been entirely successful in implementing the lessons from that book. Yeah, I'll work on that next year. I think that as far as nonfiction goes, I would probably want to read a little bit more under science and technology and history and politics. Next up is reading form. I was really interested to see this. I knew what the top would be, but this is my breakdown for ebook, physical book versus audiobook only. And a whopping 81% of the books that I read were on ebook using my Kindle, and it was a total of about 91. And I'm planning to do a video when I've hit 100 books having read on my Kindle, and kind of like a wrap up of my thoughts on my Kindle with all the reading that I've done on it. But yeah, ebooks definitely my preferred form of reading, simply because, and I've been reading more physical books lately. I think I'm falling to the into the booktube trap a little bit and picking up more physical books. But I still, even having done that, I still prefer my e-reader. It's so much easier to read on the e-reader, just to hold the book and also have appropriate lighting. It's fantastic. Definitely gonna remain my top category. Audiobook only, that's for the books that I only read on audiobook. In reality, I actually do use audiobooks in combination with my ebook and physical books a significant portion of the time, but it is very rare that I listen to a book on audio only. And so that's why that's a pretty small percentage at 5%. I'm pretty happy with this. It's obviously not balanced, but that's okay. It meets my personal needs. And then the last thing that I was interested to see was the percentage of books that I had purchased versus books that I had borrowed. And this also landed in a place that I'm pretty satisfied with. So I borrowed 85% of the books that I read this year, mostly from my public library, whether it be the ebook, physical book, or the audiobook. And then 15% were purchased by me, whether it be the physical book or the ebook. I don't have audiobooks on here because it was a lot harder for me to track that. I have to go into a lot more deeper analysis in my Amazon account to figure out how many audiobooks that I bought. That being said, I do have an Audible membership, so I technically bought at least 12 audiobooks, but then I also buy some of them when they go on sale or if they are cheaper than the cost of a credit. So yeah, I'd have to do some digging to figure out how many audiobooks I actually purchased this year. All right, guys, that's it. Those are all of the stats that I wanted to break down for the books that I read in the year 2020. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with how my reading went this year, and taking a look at these stats is going to allow me to set the goals that I have for next year. And I'm definitely going to do a video talking about my 2021 reading goals. So I hope you subscribe and stay tuned for that. In the meantime, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.